We are Climate Defense Center. This is our presentation on the climate change in New Zealand, Auckland, and Maori people. In this presentation, we are going to talk about vulnerabilities and opportunities in relation to their basic dimensions, the history of the region's involvement in fossil fuel burning and the deforestation, and how UNFCCC, Kyoto, and Paris are working in our region. Finally, we are going to provide our recommendation consistent with our region's policies.
The vulnerability, droughts, and the lack of water. In ecological aspects, vulnerable to forest fire, more frequent in eastern area with increased flooding after major downpours. In economy aspect, agriculture exposed, people might have to pay more for food. In social aspect, health problems related to low water flows and poor water quality. The vulnerability high temperature in New Zealand. Temperatures are expected to rise even more quickly in the future, with the best estimates of temperature predicting increase about 1 degree Celsius by 2040 and 2 Celsius degree by 2090. In ecological aspects, resulting early or prolonged dry seasons, droughts, and even ecological destruction to a degree. In economy aspect, devote to mitigating the effects of health through technologies such as air conditioning. In social aspect, extreme heat can cause illnesses such as heat cramps, heat stroke, and even death. The opportunity about longer tourist season. In economy aspect, tourists contribute to sales, profit, jobs, tax revenues, and income in an area. In culture aspect, more tourists come, more local culture are discovered. In ecological aspect, tourists put enormous stress on local land use and can lead to soil erosion, increased pollution, natural habitat loss, and more pressure on endangered species. The vulnerability about heavy rain. In ecological aspects, the capacity of stormwater system may be exceeded more frequently, causing surface flooding and river flooding. In economic aspect, damage to building and infrastructure and crops and livestock. In social aspects, risk of human life. The vulnerability about sea level rise. Melting ice and glaciers and expansion of seawater cause an average rise in relative mean sea level of 1.7 millimeter per year over the 20th century. In economy aspect, coastal economies will suffer losses because the rise will result in reduced industrial capital and decline in GDP of coastal area. In ecological aspect, cause destructive erosion, wetland flooding, aquifer, and agriculture soil contamination with salt, and lost habitat for fish, birds, and plants. In social aspect, people have to move to another area because of sea level rise. The opportunity about agriculture in Auckland. The warmer temperature, a long growing season, and frost becoming rare could provide opportunity to grow crop. In economy aspect, farmers in subtropical region might benefit from faster growth of pasture and better crop growing condition. In ecological aspect, this benefit may be limited by negative effects of climate change, such as water supply issues, increased flood risk, or greater frequency and intensity of storms. In social aspect, it will provide the more food for people.
Vulnerability, traditional culture, Maori people. Many rural Maoris relies on the use of public and private land and the coastal areas for hunting and fishing to supplement household food supplies, recreation, and the collection of firewood and natural resources. A changed climate will put additional stress on the traditional ways of life that are already stretched due to resource restrictions. Opportunity tax. Maori people. Indigenous groups have a profound knowledge based off traditional ecological knowledge, offers them certain opportunities and strengths that can offset the negative effects of Americanization, help Maori be more resilient in the face of climate change, despite their social vulnerabilities. Maori social vulnerabilities will be exhibited by climate change. But climate change may also provide avenue for Maori to teach their worldwide to other New Zealanders and become more involved with governmental and climatic discussions. Mediation plan. Main problem. New Zealand landmarkers proposed a zero-carbon bill that aims to make New Zealand reduce its greenhouse gas emissions to a point the country becomes mostly carbon neutral by 2050. It gives some leeway to farmers, however, who brings in much of the country's foreign income. For farm groups, the measures are too burdensome for environmentalists. The bill is weak because there are no penalties for non-compliance. So it establish the purpose of meeting on the both parties and establish the time limit. Make sure that everyone understands the rules of engagement. Allowed both sides have an uninterrupted opportunity to give their stories. Make sure to respect for all. Have a clear idea of how you want the negotiation process to be proceed. Think about what it takes to make it easy to reach agreement. Focus on conflict and acknowledge each other's needs and allow each other to vent. Try to meet the needs of both sides. Recap the conversation with solution and thank both sides for talking. If the problem was not solved, reschedule another meeting and come up with some different plans. Carbon footprint in New Zealand. Gross greenhouse gas emissions in 2017. 18.9 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. Main contribution and agriculture 40.8%. The biggest contributor Frontier, Alliance Group, tuna dairy companies, etc. Agriculture is responsible for about half of New Zealand's gross emissions because New Zealand has a small population and a lot of livestock. Energy 40.7% contact energy, Genesis, Z energy and etc. IPPU, industrial processes and product use, 6% refining, New Zealand Landard, Invoknik Limited, etc. West, 5%, the least contributor, BP Fletcher Buildings and etc. Human rights issues, right to life, water and sanitation, food, health, house, self-determination, culture and development. Economy before industrialization and global imperialism. Before the Industrial Revolution began in 1760, people didn't own much. Clothes, handmade from local plants and animals, were expected to last for many years. Goods required a lot of work to produce, such as paper and glass, were expensive and only the wealthy could afford them. Food was also grown and prepared locally. In most cases, it was eaten soon after harvest or hunting, although home-based preservation methods were used to allow some foods to be eaten later. The Industrial Revolution replaced many human workers with machines. Cheap mass-produced goods replaced expensive handmade goods, and often new materials were used like plastic rather than the natural materials. As a result, goods became less expensive and were available in greater quantities. As industry became more productive, more and more goods were produced to be sold at low prices.
The arrival of Europeans brought new peoples, materials, plants, animals, technologies, and ideas together with new sources of capital and opportunities to trade. Also, for many years, New Zealand's economy was built on a narrow range of agricultural products, and most emission is from agricultural individual emissions. This can create conflicts between the indigenous people and the government. And there's a human rights legacy to its history. Government want to take away limestone from indigenous people to lower carbon emission, but violating the right to life, to food, and to live. And talking about fossil fuel burning in New Zealand. Fossil fuel energy consumption in New Zealand was reported at 59.70 59.37% in 2015. New Zealand ranked the 95 in the world, like relative to other countries. And the history of deforestation in New Zealand. Around 1008, before humans arrived in New Zealand, forests covered more than 80% of the land. Maori race, they burnt large tracts of forest, and mainly on the coast and eastern sides of the two-man island. By the time European settlement began, around 1840, some 6.7 million hectares of forest has been destroyed. By 2000, New Zealand had only 6.2 million hectares of native forests. So the effects of human rights in New Zealand is about the right to life, to food, to water, and to health. So the right to life, an increase in people suffering from death and injury occurring from an increase in floods, storms, heat waves, fires, and droughts in New Zealand. And about the right to food, higher temperature could cause problems for fruit growth in northern areas because plants such as kiwi fruit require cold weathers. And the right to water, as temperature rise, more frequent and extreme water conditions are appeared, and include droughts and floods, will impact on agricultural production. Last, the right to health. If greenhouse gas emissions continue at current level, many places in New Zealand will see more than 80 days per year above 25 degrees centigrade. And currently, most parts of the country typically since between 20 to 40 days per year above 25 degrees centigrade. The old population are particularly vulnerable to heat waves, and there are four least trade-offs of climate change. The first is emerging industry will appear, and second is extending the tourist tourism. Third is funds being provided by the government to help protect homes and businesses from the physical impacts of climate change. The last is need a radical shift in education system to tackle climate change. About the international negotiation on climate change in New Zealand, the government participates in international climate change negotiations under the UNFCCC and the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement. And in 2009, the government decided that New Zealand would take an emission reduction target for the period 2013 to 2020 under the UNFCCC, rather than under the Kyoto Protocol itself. And the legal frameworks to manage carbon emission. The Minister of New Zealand for Climate Change introduced the Zero Carbon Amendment Bill, which will do the following. First, set a new greenhouse gas emissions reduction target, and also set budgets as a stepping stone towards the long-term targets. Third, require the governments to develop and implement policies. And the last one is that establish a new independent climate change commission to provide expert advice and monitoring to help keep successive government to meet the long-term goals.
For Maori people platform on UNFCCC and Kyoto, the Maori people are strong advocates of sustainable land management and the protection of other valuable biological resources for the prosperity of the current and future generations. The Maori economy is developing economy within a developed nation. Maori said, "We encourage all nations to support a straightforward amendment to the rules of the Kyoto Protocol." New Zealand has signed a Paris Agreement on April 22, 2016. In New York, the proposal of the Paris Agreement is to strengthen country capacity to address the impacts of climate change, keep average global temperature below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels while working to limit temperature to 1.5 degrees Celsius. New Zealand ratified the Kyoto Protocol in December 2002. New Zealand obligations under the Kyoto Protocol include submitting an annual inventory of greenhouse gas emissions to the UNFCCC. For Auckland involvement in UNFCCC, by 2090, Auckland maximum temperature is expected to exceed 11 to 70 days, with a maximum temperature of more than 25 degrees, and the forest slate is likely to become rare. Because of this, to reduce carbon dioxide emission and temperature rise, Auckland has been taking the following action: deliver clean, safe, and equitable transport option, move to a zero-carbon, climate resilient economic, transform existing building and place. Maori people involvement in UNFCCC. A solution that Maori expressed about climate change is called rahui. Maori people have also expressed that a zero-carbon bill isn't very promising. A better solution would be to try to build trade relationship at the national and international level to reduce carbon emission. Maori have to reduce greenhouse gas emission by replacing natural gas oil with biofuel. Negotiation after the Paris COP. Ratification is a formal step that countries must take to become full participants and ensure the deal takes effect. New Zealand ratified the Paris Agreement on 4 October 2016. By ratifying the agreement, New Zealand commits to having an emission reduction target and regularly updating it. Ratification also commits us to countries to regularly report on our emission and how we are tracking toward meeting our targets. Continue to provide financial support to assist developing countries' mitigation and adaptation efforts. Plan for adaptation. For the realistic and practical cost-benefit analysis, the financial cost and social analysis recommendation, more labor, do scientific research, make investigation, writing record. It is possible at present to obtain virtually and desired result that one might wish from a cost-benefit analysis study. To accept the current situation as merely a practical matter of little import in the real world would involve a misplaced sense of accomplishment and settle. Anecdotal evidence indicates that public servants and their political masters are not averse to hiring consultants with a flexible disposition. For the negation consequence, although the methodology and the concepts are well established, their practical application leaves much to be desired. It still needs to consolidate and strength. Also, more labor means more payment. It would increase the economical pressure of government.
Now we are talking about addressing justice and equity, human rights and development to achieve a human-centered approach, protecting the rights of most vulnerable and sharing the burdens and benefits of climate change and its resolution equitably and fairly. Therefore, the recommendation will be informed by the following core principles: respect and protect human rights, supports the right to development, share benefits and burdens equitably, ensure that decisions on climate change are participatory, transparent, and accountable, highlight gender equality, use effective partnership to secure climate justice. Obviously, the vulnerable parties on behalf of Maori people from grassroots, because they do not have too much power on land management and the protection of resources. One important factor of climate justice is that they are grassroots movements, which stress the need for communities to be involved in organizing their own actions and deciding their own futures. While climate justice often involves putting pressure on corporations or governments, this pressure comes from the people and not from above. To achieve justice and equality of vulnerable populations, principles from FORMO can ensure their basic rights by respecting, supporting, and multi-aspect of management. Also, we designed a video game and arts exhibition to develop an overall media and art strategy for our. In our video game, the background is climate change has caused global warming and sea level rise. So, this area is the only land where the player can live. The girl in this video game is producing the least amount of carbon emission. In this case, the average temperature will decrease and there are more places to live. In our art exhibition, the sand glass represents time. The upper part of sand glass represents the past. The lower part represents the problem of climate change facing in New Zealand and the world. For our public media strategy, the government of New Zealand should make press release because climate change is a big concern that threatens people's lives. If the governments don't make press release, people may not value it very well. Advertisements should be placed. It is a good way to let more people know about the effects of climate change and let them take actions. Using social media accounts is a good way to spread information and let others know what happens in New Zealand, Auckland, and Maori people. Making some microfilms and some video game will help spread information in the region. And this is our recommendations for future. To improve the impacts of climate change, New Zealand, Auckland, and Maori people should follow the following recommendations to reduce their carbon footprint. Use less energy. Take public transport. Reduce the fuel used in transport. Reduce the garbage. Use water efficiently. Eat seasonally, locally, and more plants. Switch to sustainable, clean energy. Minimize purchase of new products. Recycle as much as possible. Plant more trees. Support climate action organizations. Encourage and support greenhouse reducing parties in community. The following are our citations. And thank you for listening our presentation.